Students, good morning. My name is Janet. I teach economics and business management. And today's session will be focused on how to begin prep for your IB Econ exam. So at the beginning itself, I would like to say that Econ is kind of a content heavy subject. So students usually don't know where to begin. So this series of webinars will be mainly focused on what topics to focus on, what kind of questions to focus on. Today will be kind of an introduction into the whole syllabus and how to structure it once you start revising. Let me just switch to my screen. So IB Economics, whether you're HL or SL, has 4 units, as you all know. At this point, because you're close to the end of grade 12, I want to draw your attention back to the concepts, because especially in your long answers, we still do want to see you using the concepts. So I do insist that if you're writing a 10 marker or a 15 marker in whichever paper, you do mention at least one of the 9 concepts. So before going into that exam, do look into these 9 concepts. Also, for your 15 marker in paper 1, I'll get back to this again. It would be really good if you could refresh your real world examples, because by now you will know what unit you will be attempting for paper 1. So this would be a good time to start working on that. So just a quick overview as to what you have accomplished in these past 2 years, which is a lot. You've gone through 4 units, you've written your 3 IAs, which is a lot. So SL students have actually gone through 150 hours of learning for Econ, and HL students have gone into 240 hours of learning for Econ. Now, grounding to the exam, I want you all to notice whatever level you are following, you should see the number of hours IB has given to that unit. For example, for microeconomics, for HL students, it's 70 hours of work. So obviously this unit is very, very important. For SL students, global economy carries has been devoted the maximum amount of time. So this is where your attention should lie. Again, bringing back to the beginning of grade 11, this grounding is very, very important. Whether paper 1, 2, or 3, these 3 skills should be seen in your written answers. So we start with the content, and I'm confidently saying that every student knows the content, which is all the theories, models, ideas, whatever you've learned, all the graph work, all of you are well versed in this. Where you lose marks is usually the use of concepts, and for paper 2 and 3, developing context based on the case studies given. Because paper 2 and 3 are highly driven by the data given to you. If you do not use them, if you do not incorporate them in your answers, especially for the 15 marker for your paper 2, you tend to lose marks. For paper 1, all focus is for your real world examples that you end up choosing for your unit. So today we'll ground ourselves into this. We call these the 3 C's. Interestingly, the 3 C's exist in business management also. These are our 3 units. By now, you may have noticed there's a lot of crossovers. For example, indirect taxes belong to Unit 2, microeconomics, and taxes, we talk about tariffs in the global economy also. We also talk about taxes when we talk about macroeconomics, when we are making our demand side policies. So use that crossover as a boon to you, and don't think, oh my God, how am I going to do taxes in all 3? The concept behind taxes is the same. It's to discourage something, the production or consumption of any commodity, whether at a micro level or at the global economies level. The central real world issues are also very, very important. And again, we tend to lose sight of them. Even if you do not know what they are at the end of grade 12, it's very, very okay. Now is the time to get grounded into it. So the 3 main units, micro, macro, and global economy, they are centered around these 6 inquiry questions, because IB Econ is very inquiry based, where the student asks and answers questions. All right, unit 1 is these blue highlights. Unit 1, microeconomics, is based on consumer and producer choices. If you can see, IB has built in the concepts here itself. Choice is one of the concepts. Second part of microeconomics, where we talk about market failures and all, they are all about us not being able to fulfill economic objectives. So it's all about market failure, and does government intervention even help? So if you see, intervention is one of the key concepts here. When we come to macroeconomics, It also has two underlying questions that we're trying to answer. Why does economic activity vary over time? This is all your macroeconomic disequilibrium, where we're talking about inflationary and deflationary gaps. The second part, where we're talking about policy, our demand side policies, our supply side policies, economic growth and development, the big questions. Those are answering the question, how do governments manage their economy and how effective are their policies? If you remember, most of your 10 and 15 markers are questioning how policies may or may not be effective. That's literally the paper 215 marker. For global economy, the questions are very short, but also very, very important. In global economy, you'll end up talking about stakeholders a lot because we are answering the question, who are winners and losers? In economic integration outside your country, there will always be a winner, there'll always be a loser. There is no win-win situation in international economics. That is why countries' development levels are different. So the first part of the third of unit 4, where we're talking about tariffs and exchange rates and balance of payments, all of those are answering this question. Who are the winners and losers? The last 4 units, usually we tend to overlook these units because there's nothing new here. But I would like you to understand that these 4 units, where we are talking about economic development, different indices of measuring economic development, where we are distinguishing between economic growth and development, they are the heart of economics. They tie together the entire syllabus. So if you have ignored these last 4 units so far, I would really recommend that you don't. There's a lot of data that can actually help you to write your answers here. There's a lot of concepts that tie together. So these are our central real world issues that we are trying to answer throughout the whole content. Another thing that we need to focus on, and this is true for all IB subjects, not just mine, your 4 assessment objectives are your best friends when you're starting your preparation, because they will tell you how much to study a topic. By now, grade 12, we're all panicking. We don't know what to do. There's 3 HLs, 3 SLs, EE, IAT. Okay, so many things are happening. You need to ground yourself on these 4 pillars for every subject. When you open the subject guide, before studying, you plan your study according to the assessment objectives. Any topic that's an AO1, if you look at the top, knowledge and understanding is AO1, assessment objective 1. If a topic has AO1 written next to it, you do not go into a lot of detail there. These are just your defined questions. These are just give 2 example questions. So the subject guide will tell you that AO1 topics do not need to be studied in depth. So you can relax a little. Coming to AO2, application and analysis. These are topics that you need to go into a little bit more detail. So you need to know a little bit more about these topics. For example, can you distinguish between demand and supply side policies? Can you study a graph and tell me where the equilibrium is happening? Can you mark welfare loss on so-and-so diagram? That's application and analysis. Are you able to apply your knowledge of economics and analyze to a certain extent? From experience, I can tell you that students excel in these 2. The main problem for economics comes here in assessment objective 3, because this is where our concepts come in, our connection to the case study comes in, and our real world examples come in. You must be aware of the DEED and CLASP acronym by now. By now, that's vocabulary to you. This is where the CLASP elements come in. This is where you're talking about long-term and short-term impacts. This is where you're talking about stakeholder impacts, impacts of policy. This is where you're recommending. So this is the challenge for econ students, because again, econ is a very content-heavy subject. So when you see AO3 written in the subject guide next to a topic, that is the one to target. You must go into depth into that topic, especially for HL students. You must do written practice. I understand at this time, you don't have time to solve entire papers. If you can solve, practice only AO3 questions, I'll give you a key to the command terms that will tell you what is an AO3 question. Practice just those, self-assess. Trust me, this will give you a big boost. This Knowledge of AO3 can make the difference between a 6 and a 7 and a 4 and a 5. The last one for econ students, again, I'm very confident students do this pretty well. AO4 is use of application and skills. For econ students, this is your graph work. This is your ideas. If you can see the first sub point, we normally forget this. Produce well-structured written material. It's not just your graph work for econ. If you're able to write that 10 marker in paper 1 in 4 clear paragraphs, every paragraph has a theme. It's not just a mishmash of words. You are demonstrating AO4 skills. If you see the second point, this is focusing on your diagram work. If you're saying a tax will reduce externality and you're supporting it with a diagram, if you're using a real life example and you're taking numbers from that and putting them on your graph, this skill is demonstrated. And if you see, this is the highest order skill. It carries a lot of weight. Look at the third one here, selecting, interpreting, and analyzing data. So this is your paper 2 and 3 for HLs is highly dependent on this skill. If they've given you a graph, can you understand that graph and answer questions based off of that? If they've given you the profile of a country, of an economy in paper 2, do you even know what to do with that data? You see the second last one, it's about interpretation. It's also about quantitative techniques. These are all fancy words for just making the graphs right. Knowing how to calculate the area of a triangle when you're calculating your welfare loss. Knowing what to take as base, knowing what to take as height. Simple things. So once you start preparation for your econ exam, focus more on AO3. I'm not saying ignore AO1, know the definitions, know basic meanings, but AO3 is the one that usually students fall back on. Now, I was just talking about command terms. So this is a bunch of very common command terms only for economics. Every subject has a favorite set of command terms. They are different for different subjects. Where you can find them is towards the end of the economics subject guide. There's a big list there, but I have compiled a list of the common ones for each assessment objective. Why I'm giving you this is because once you see one of these words, your mind should connect them to an assessment objective. So you know how much to write. For example, if you see here on the top right quadrant, for an explain question which belongs to AO2, you do not have to write pages and pages of 5 or 6 paragraphs and diagrams because that's just application and analysis. Explain the importance of an indirect tax. Here, they're not asking you to recommend anything. They're not asking you to critique it. They're just asking you explain what an indirect tax is, meaning define it, show us a diagram, and show us the impact on 1 or 2 stakeholders. This answer will finish in 4 paragraphs. However, if you look at the bottom left quadrant, you look at the second one, the same question with an evaluate command term. Evaluate the impact of an indirect tax on blah, blah, blah economy. Here, because you are in AO3, you're expected to give the pros and cons, impacts on stakeholders, long-term, short-term impacts, and also critique the indirect tax. What could go wrong? Why is indirect tax not the perfect answer to everything? So the student who cracks this can crack the IB very well. Content everybody knows. You need to know what to write where. Let's go through this list again. Observe it carefully. Assessment objective 1 it's only for econ. These are not true for other subjects. These are the commonly repeated command terms. So once you get that question paper in the exam, first do this. Look at the command terms. These are usually the first words in the question and write what assessment objective it is. So you'll know what to write. IB is not very kind as to how much time they give students. It's very challenging as it is. So you need to know how much to write. For example, list 2 SDGs. I think 2 years back they'd asked this question. So you literally just list the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. You do not explain them. We need 2 words only. That's it. Describe the impact of a subsidy. In one line, you say a subsidy encourages production of merit goods. Full stop. You get full 2 marks for this. Another way to understand which is an AO1 question is that AO1 questions will be usually of 2 or 1 marks. So if you cannot remember this list, I understand. At least remember that 1 or 2 mark questions are AO1s. We do not go into detail. We do not make a diagram unless they ask us. Let's skip to AO2. AO2 are analyze questions, comment questions, distinguish questions, and explain questions. Explain and analyze being the most common ones for IB Econ. If you cannot remember this, remember that these are your 4-mark questions. In paper 2, they ask you to draw, for example, draw a negative externalities diagram and explain the impact. So the explain part is your AO2. Come to AO3, please, with me. Your synthesis and evaluation questions for IB Econ, these are your 10 markers and 15 markers, regardless of what paper you're writing. Okay, so if you notice here, there are terms like examine, evaluate, recommend, and justify, very big terms. In the subject guide, if you go to the end, a huge glossary of command terms is given. They have told you what to write when it's an evaluate question and what to write when it's a recommend question. I think I forgot to write discuss. I will add it to the list before sending it over. Discuss is also an assessment objective. 3, command term. And you need to know the difference, not just for econ, for every subject. What is the difference between a discuss question and an evaluate question? Knowing that itself can place you in the top mark band. Look at AO4 with me, please. Now, AO4s could be, if it's a calculate question, it'll be just a 1 or 2 mark question. If it's a construct question, it'll be 1 or 2 marks. These are smaller in marks, but then they help you to explain whatever you're talking about. So all your calculates, your constructs, your determines. For HL students, paper 3 is literally AO4. They've given you the graph, they ask you to label it. Label the price after the tariff. For all students, when you're doing paper 2, you have command terms given, construct an ADAS graph to show blah, blah, blah. So AO4, everything is built into the questions. So you need to understand what the question is asking you to do. Moving on, we'll just look at the assessment outline a little. This is only for SL students, just to ground yourself now so you can prepare accordingly. For SL students, our main focus is paper 2. Sorry. Paper 1 is just a 75-minute paper. You have to write 2 answers, a 10 marker and a 15 marker. Paper 2 for SL students is an hour and 45 minutes. It's a 40-mark paper. You get 2 case studies, you pick 1. This paper is called the data response paper. So obviously, it's very heavy on you using data given in the case study. You forego that, you don't write that, you lose marks. We'll talk a little bit more about individual papers in a while. IA, I'm sure everybody's sorted. So that 30% weightage for IA is already sealed. What is in your hand is now the remaining 70%, which is a lot. For the HL students, the stakes are a little bit higher. But if you notice, HL students, the weightages are more evenly distributed for you. So you cannot say paper 3 is more important and paper 1 is not. It's fairly evenly divided. So for HLs also, this 20% is already out of your hands. It's gone and done. You can focus on scoring this remaining 80%, which is a lot. The stakes are high for you. Paper 1, again, is a 75-minute paper. Same part A and B, worth 25 marks. Usually students score pretty well from past experience in paper 1 because this is the one that we practice the most. The main challenge for HL students remains in paper 3. Paper 2 is fairly simple. We've had a lot of time to practice with our teachers in school. It's again a 1 hour 45-minute paper. Again, a data response paper for HLs. Again, 40 marks. The same thing. You get 2 case studies, you pick one and you write this. Simple things like reading instructions on the paper matter. I've had students in IB exams who've forgotten to read the instructions and they panic and they have gone on and answered both case studies. You cannot do justice to two full 40-mark questions. They end up losing miserably in the exam. So be prepared. Now is the time to start preparing. Remember these small little details. In paper 2, we do only one part out of 2 big case studies. In paper 3, the thing is that they will give you 2 questions. You have to do both. So many times HL students miss out because they forget to read these instructions. Paper 2 is 1 out of 2 case studies. Paper 3 is both. You have no choice in paper 3. Paper 3 is a policy paper. So of course, your focus has to be on that 110 marker you're writing for each case study. It's a 1 hour 45-minute paper. Lots of calculation questions. Here, the focus is on HL extension material, all the HL topics. If you do not know what HL topics are still, it's okay. You go to the subject guide. They are written there in bold. Anything written in the subject guide in bold is HL content. The focus here is on both quantitative and qualitative questions, HL students. So it could be a definition question. It could be a look at the diagram and calculate XYZ question also. From the diagram, can you calculate producer's revenue? So the focus is equally divided into quantity and qualitative questions. We look at the papers in a little bit more detail because I think if you understand 3 things, you're very well sorted for the beginning of the revision. You should be sorted with the assessment objectives. You should be aware of command terms and you should know what each paper is about. So for econ, paper 1 is an extended response paper, meaning essay type answers. The good thing is that the papers are identical for HLs and SLs. Only the weightages differ. Also knowing the difference between unstructured and structured papers. I'm sure most of you know unstructured papers, they will give you a question paper and writing paper to write on. You do not answer anything on the question paper. If you make a mind map, it's okay. We do not look at it. The examiners will grade only what is written on your answer sheet. Now, paper 1, I think it's better for the new syllabus because earlier all questions were jumbled up. Now, since the syllabus changed in 2022, they gave question 1 from microeconomics, question 2 from macro, and question 3 from global economy. So now would be a right time for you to choose your strength. If I am well versed with global economy, I can start preparing my real life examples from global economy also. Then I don't need to do a huge list of RLEs from micro and macro. It's a very, very big task. You must have real life examples for your 15 marker. So start wise. Okay. So there'll be 3 questions in paper 1, A, B, 1, 2, 3. You pick one. If I pick global economy, I must answer question 3 part A and question 3 part B. Do not mix them. Do not do question 1A and question 2B. Make sure you remember these very simple instructions. So if you're picking question 3, do both from that question only. So question 3A and question 3B. Here, the good news for HL students is no HL topics will be asked. This paper is identical for HLs and SLs. So this is where you capitalize. SL students, this is 30% of your grade. So if you focus well on paper 1, this paper asks you to follow just the deed and clasp components, which I think all of us are very well versed on. You capitalize on your 10 marker, try to score 8 or 9 or 10 in the 10 marker. It gives you a buffer for your 15 marker. You have to play smart. Part A is a 10 marker. Here you're following only the deed elements, which is giving the definition, explanation, and example, a hypothetical example, and a diagram. Here we are not looking for real life examples. However, if you give a real life example, good. Even if you give a hypothetical example, good enough, no problem. So if you notice now, There is no AO3 here, meaning for your 10 markers, you will not get justify questions, evaluate questions, discuss questions. This is what it means. And this is why you need to be prepared accordingly. The second part is the 15 marker. Here, on an average, IB students usually score between 7 and 10 marks because they miss out on the small details. Now, if you notice, this question has all 4 assessment objectives, meaning you need to define things, you need to explain things, you may need to evaluate or justify things, and you will need to support it with a diagram and a real life example. So this is why I say it is a good time for you to pick your favorite for paper 1, whether it's micro, macro, or global economy, and start compiling a list. Have real life examples for each of the topics in that unit. If you do not give a real life example, if that real life example is not reflected on your diagram, if you're talking about a tariff and you're making a graph, make sure that real life example tariff is mentioned on the diagram. This is how you stay in the top mark band. You don't do this, if there's no real world example, even if your answer is perfect, you drop down to the 8 to 9 mark band. That is how high the stakes are for the 15 marker. So let's say I wrote a perfect answer for impact of tariff. I did not write a real life example, and obviously my diagram is again theoretical. There is no number from my real life example on the diagram. Everything else is perfect. I still will be marked out of 9. I'm not saying I will get 9. I will be marked out of 9. You need to remember these things. So out of 9, I could end up getting a 6 or a 7 in a 15 marker. This is how we lose marks. So understanding the requirements of every question, very, very important. Moving on to paper 2, this is where the differences start coming in. HL students, this will be where your HL topics also start coming in. The duration is the same for both HLs and SLs. Sorry. It is a 40-mark paper. Here, 2 case studies are given. Question 1, question 2. You're going to pick one. I cannot stress it enough. You do not write both. You do not have time to write everything. It's impossible. You cannot do justice to it. This is a data response paper. This is also an unstructured paper, meaning question paper is separate and you get answer sheets to write. Anything you write on the question paper, the examiner does not see. We only get to see your answer paper. So make sure you're not writing answers on the question paper, because as an examiner, I'm telling you, we do not get your question papers. We only get scanned copies of your answer sheet. Now, the text or data or the questions may be same for SLs and HLs. HL students will get some questions on HL topics. Calculators are allowed for this paper. Paper 1, they will not allow you to carry calculator. Please remember to pick only one question from the case study. Because this paper is lengthy, remember to read your instructions. Questions range from assessment objective 1 to 4. They do not spare you here. The structure of the paper 2 is such that they give you a very in-depth profile of an economy. They'll talk about microeconomic concepts. They'll talk about something related to global economics. They'll relate it to macroeconomic policies. And they also give you statistics. Usually 2 tables are given for each economy. They give you a variety of data. That data is your magic wand. You need to use that data in your answers. It's not given there without a reason. 2-mark questions. There are subparts in this paper. All 2-mark questions. See, the good thing about paper 2 is that it's very predictable. We know the flow of the questions. We also know that they will tell you what diagram to make. All you have to do is make that diagram. That's the best thing about paper 2. So paper 2 questions, they include defined questions, basic calculations. So you need to brush up on these basic skills. Normally, students forget these tiny little things that we have done in grade 11. Calculating PED, income elasticity, how to calculate GDP and GNI separately, how to calculate the rate of inflation. These are basic calculations that you need to start practicing on. We have a bunch of 4-mark questions, around 6 per case study in paper 2. This is where a lot of assessment objectives come in. There will be no AO3. Usually they will name the graph. They will say, make a demand and supply diagram to show externality caused by consumption of cigarettes. So they've literally told you what graph to make. We cannot mess up here. Also, another thing, these questions always have 2 command terms. Make a graph and explain it. It's a 4-mark question, so it's divided into 2 plus 2. 2 marks for making the graph, 2 marks for explaining it. Sadly, in their panic, many students just make the graph, they forget to explain. And it's a huge loss. If you do the same thing for the 6 4-mark questions, you end up losing a lot of marks. It's not worth it. Read the questions carefully. A 4-mark question cannot be only one graph. Okay. The usual topics, and they will name these graphs for you. It's from all 3 units.